Have you ever wondered if there's more to life than what science can explain? Today, I'm going to share a story that changed a doctor's life forever. When a 9-year-old patient asked him one simple question: "Do you believe in God?" What happened next will touch your heart and might even change the way you see the world. Make sure you subscribe to our channel right now, because this is one story you'll want to share with everyone you know. Dr. Thomas Walker adjusted his stethoscope as he entered room 307 at Boston Children's Hospital. The late autumn afternoon light streamed through the large windows, reflecting off the blonde hair of Emily, a 9-year-old girl who lived with her parents in a quiet suburb of the city. Emily had been hospitalized for 3 weeks, with a rare autoimmune disease attacking her nervous system. Doctors called it acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, but to her parents, Mark and Susan, it was simply the invisible monster consuming their only daughter day by day. "How's our warrior doing today?" Dr. Walker asked with a smile, approaching the bed where Emily sat, drawing in her sketchbook. He noticed her hands trembled more than they had the day before. "I'm okay, Dr. Tom," replied Emily, using the nickname she had created for him. "Mom brought my new colored pencils." Susan, seated in the armchair beside the bed, smiled tiredly. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless nights. Mark had gone to fetch coffee from the hospital cafeteria. Dr. Walker examined Emily's vital signs, noting the results on his tablet. The numbers weren't encouraging. Her immune system continued to attack her own body despite aggressive treatments. "Dr. Tom," Emily suddenly called out, looking at him with her big blue eyes. "Do you believe in God?" The question shot through the room like an unexpected bolt of lightning. Dr. Walker felt his body freeze. In his 15 years of pediatric medicine, he had never been confronted with this question so directly, especially from such a young patient. "Why do you ask that, Emily?" He tried to buy time, feeling Susan's gaze on him. "Because Mom and Dad pray every night for me to get better. They talk to God. But I wanted to know if you talk to Him about me, too." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. The son of a physics professor and a biologist, he'd grown up in a home where science was the supreme authority. He wasn't exactly an atheist. He preferred to define himself as agnostic. God's existence was a question he skillfully avoided in his professional and personal life. He began, looking at the monitors, his notes, anywhere except Emily's expectant eyes. "I believe in medicine, Emily. That's what I was trained in." "But medicine comes from somewhere, doesn't it?" Emily insisted, with the disconcerting wisdom that sometimes emerges in children facing life-threatening situations. "Dad says even the most complicated things had to be invented by someone." Mark entered the room at that moment, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sensing the tension in the air, he looked questioningly at his wife. "Emily is asking Dr. Walker philosophical questions," Susan explained softly. "It's not philosophy, Mom. It's just a question," Emily protested, turning her gaze back to the doctor. "So, Dr. Tom, you didn't answer." Thomas felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just professional discomfort. It was a deeper uneasiness, as if the question had touched a locked door within his soul that he didn't even know existed. "Emily, I don't know if I believe in God the same way your parents do," he finally answered honestly. "But that doesn't mean I don't believe in something greater than us. I believe in life, in human potential, in the incredible capacity our bodies have to fight and heal." The answer seemed to satisfy Emily momentarily, but Thomas knew there was more to it. Something about that conversation had affected him in a way he couldn't explain. As he finished the examination and prepared to leave the room, promising to return later, he felt an inexplicable impulse. "Emily," he said, turning at the door, "maybe you're right. Maybe I should think about it more." That night, for the first time in many years, Dr. Thomas Walker couldn't push away the thoughts sparked by a child's simple question. And without realizing it, he began to question everything he had believed until then. The next few days at the hospital were busier than usual. An influenza outbreak at the beginning of Boston's winter overwhelmed the doctors, and Dr. Walker immersed himself in his work with even greater intensity. But even between consultations and emergencies, Emily's question continued to echo in his mind. In the hospital cafeteria, Thomas absently stirred his coffee while reviewing Emily's latest test results. The numbers had worsened. The inflammation was progressing despite the new treatment protocol. "You look like you've seen a ghost," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric neurologist and longtime colleague, sitting across from him with a salad. "It's Emily Wilson, room 307, Thomas replied, running his hand through the gray hair at his temples. "We're not managing to stabilize her." Sarah examined the results with a grave expression. "We've tried practically everything in the protocol. Maybe we should consider that experimental treatment in Cleveland? I've already spoken with her parents about it. They don't have insurance to cover it and couldn't afford the costs." Sarah nodded understandingly. Silence settled between them until Thomas spoke again. "She asked me if I believe in God." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. "And what did you say?" I gave an evasive answer. The typical, "I believe in science." Thomas sighed. "But the truth is, that question won't leave my head." Thomas Walker questioning the existence of God? "That's new." Sarah smiled slightly. "Your father, the famous atheist physicist, must be rolling in his grave." Thomas smiled humorlessly. "The problem is, I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I enter that room and see her parents praying, they have such genuine faith, Sarah. And Emily? She's facing something that would knock down most adults, but she maintains that smile, that hope." That afternoon, when Thomas entered Emily's room to check her vital signs, he found her alone, looking out the window at the gently falling snow. "Hi, Dr. Tom," she said upon noticing him. Her face was paler than usual, but there was a peculiar brightness in her eyes. "Hello, Emily. How are you feeling today?" he asked, approaching to check the monitors. "I talked to God last night," she said suddenly, with a serenity that seemed out of place in a 9-year-old child. Thomas stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Really? And what did he say?" Emily smiled. "He said everything has meaning, Dr. Tom. Everything happens in his time, not ours. And if," she hesitated for a moment, "if I'm supposed to die, that's okay. God has a bigger plan for me." Thomas felt his heart tighten. He was used to hearing patients talk about their beliefs, but something about the way Emily spoke, with such certainty and acceptance, deeply unsettled him. "Emily, you're not going to—" he began, but she interrupted him. "It's okay, Dr. Tom. I'm not afraid. But I want you to promise me something." "What's that?" "If something happens to me, don't be mad at God. He only does what's best, even when we don't understand." Thomas swallowed hard, unable to respond. How could a child demonstrate such wisdom and acceptance in the face of her own mortality? As a doctor, he should offer comfort. But at that moment, it was Emily comforting him. "I'll try," was all he could say. Later that day, Thomas had a long conversation with Emily's parents. Her condition was rapidly worsening, and conventional treatment options were running out. "There's an experimental treatment at a clinic in Minnesota," he explained. "It's a new approach for cases like Emily's, using targeted therapy to interrupt the specific autoimmune response." "How much would it cost?" asked Mark, squeezing his wife's hand. "More than your insurance would cover," Thomas admitted. "But don't worry about that now. I'll see what I can do." That night, Thomas did something he hadn't done in years. He called his ex-wife, Jennifer, an executive at a major pharmaceutical company. "Tom, is that really you?" The surprise was evident in her voice. Since their divorce, after the loss of their stillborn son, they had barely spoken. "Jen, I need your help," he said, explaining Emily's situation. "I know your company is involved with research on autoimmune diseases. Is there any possibility of including her in a clinical trial? The silence on the other end of the line was momentary. I can check. We have a new protocol being tested. Send me her records, and I'll see what I can do. Thank you, Jen. This means a lot. Tom, she hesitated before continuing. Are you okay? You sound different. I think I am, in a way, he answered honestly. This patient, she's affected me in a way I can't explain. Turv, don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. If you're enjoying this journey of faith, hope, and transformation, make sure to hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Join our community of storytellers and believers, because sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. 3 days later, Emily was accepted into Jennifer's company's experimental program. The treatment could begin immediately, and all costs would be covered by the pharmaceutical company as part of the clinical trial. Thomas entered Emily's room with what seemed to be the first good news in weeks. Mark and Susan listened to the explanation about the new treatment with tears of hope in their eyes. "It's like a miracle," Susan whispered, squeezing her husband's hand. Emily, who was growing weaker each day, smiled serenely from the bed. "See, Dr. Tom? God's timing." Thomas began preparations for the new protocol immediately. The medical team worked tirelessly, and for a brief moment, there was a spark of hope. The initial results seemed promising. The disease progression appeared to be slowing down. But on the third night of the new treatment, everything changed. Thomas was called to the hospital on an emergency at 2 a.m. Emily had suffered a severe seizure, followed by multiple organ failure. When he arrived at her room, the emergency team was already in full action. Thomas took command, ordering medications, procedures, anything that might stabilize her. "Come on, Emily. Stay with me," he murmured as he worked, aware of her parents watching in terror from the doorway. For 4 hours, the team fought to save Emily. At some point during that desperate battle, Thomas found himself doing something he had never done before: praying. It wasn't a formal prayer, just a desperate plea to any higher power that might exist. "Please," he whispered, "don't take her yet." But at 6:17 in the morning, with the first rays of winter sun coming through the hospital windows, Emily Wilson left this world. The heart monitor emitted the continuous sound that all doctors fear, and after several resuscitation attempts, Thomas had to accept the inevitable. "Time of death? 6:17, he declared, his voice breaking. Susan's cry echoed through the hospital corridor, while Mark embraced her, both devastated by the loss no parent should ever face. Thomas left the room feeling defeated like never before. All his years of training, all his confidence in science, all the extraordinary efforts, nothing had been enough. Emily was gone, taking with her the light that had illuminated that hospital room. Without thinking where he was going, Thomas found himself walking to the hospital chapel. The small sanctuary was empty at that early hour. He sat on one of the front benches, looking at the simple altar. "Why?" he asked the silence. "If you exist, why take a child like this? What kind of divine plan includes the suffering of an innocent?" His voice echoed off the empty walls. Tears he didn't even know he was holding back began to stream down his face. "She believed in you. Her parents believed. Even I started to believe. And for what? To show us how powerless we are?" Thomas had never felt such deep anger and overwhelming sadness at the same time. There, alone in the hospital chapel, he finally allowed all the pain he carried, not just for Emily, but for the son he never got to know, for the marriage that had failed, for all his professional losses, to surface. He didn't know how long he stayed there, only that when he finally left the chapel, he felt exhausted, empty. He still had to speak with Emily's parents, offer words of comfort he knew were inadequate. Thomas found them in the ICU waiting room, accompanied by the hospital chaplain. Michael. Susan was still crying, but there was a calmness in her grief that Thomas hadn't expected. "Dr. Walker," Mark called to him, standing up. To Thomas's surprise, the man hugged him. "Thank you for everything you did for our daughter." I'm so sorry," Thomas managed to say. "We did everything we could, but—" "We know that," Susan said, wiping away tears. Emily knew that too. Thomas sat with them, unsure what to say next. It was Susan who broke the silence. "Dr. Walker, we'd like to talk about organ donation." Thomas looked at her, surprised. "Organ donation?" Mark nodded. "Emily always said she wanted to help other people. We thought that maybe this is a way for her spirit to continue." "Of course," Thomas replied, amazed at the strength of these grieving parents. "I can start the process immediately. We need to act quickly so that the organs—" "We understand," said Susan. "It's what Emily would want." In the hours that followed, Thomas coordinated with the transplant team. Emily's organs were healthy. Her heart, liver, kidneys, corneas, all could save or improve other lives. As he supervised the process, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about Emily's words. "God has a bigger plan for me." Positive. A week after Emily's death, Thomas still felt the weight of her loss. He had returned to work, but every hospital corridor seemed to echo the absence of that girl who, in such a short time, had left such a deep mark. During a meeting with the transplant team, Thomas received information that momentarily left him speechless. "Emily Wilson's organs benefited 3 children," explained Dr. Harrison, the transplant coordinator. "Her heart went to a 7-year-old girl in Chicago with terminal cardiomyopathy. One of her kidneys and part of her liver went to a 5-year-old boy in Texas with hepatorenal syndrome. The other kidney went to a 10-year-old girl right here in Boston, who had been on dialysis for 3 years." Thomas felt something strange stir inside him. It wasn't exactly peace, but an understanding that was beginning to take shape. "Any news on how the recipients are doing?" he asked. "All 3 procedures were successful. The children are recovering as expected, with good organ acceptance. 3 lives. 3 children who now had a chance at a future thanks to Emily." Her words came back with full force. "If I'm supposed to die, that's okay. God has a bigger plan for me." That afternoon, Thomas decided to visit Mark and Susan at their home. He rarely made home visits, but he felt he needed to personally share the news about the transplants. The Wilsons' house was a modest construction in a quiet neighborhood. When Susan opened the door, Thomas noticed that, despite the evident sadness in her eyes, there was a remarkable strength in her posture. "Dr. Walker, what a surprise," she said, inviting him in. In the living room, photos of Emily smiling decorated the walls. Mark joined them, bringing coffee. "I came personally to tell you about the transplants," Thomas explained, seated on the sofa. "Emily's organs. They saved 3 children." Susan brought her hand to her mouth, moved. Mark squeezed her shoulder in support. "3 children who now have a chance at life," Thomas continued. "3 families who won't have to go through what you're going through." "Emily would be so happy," Susan whispered. "She always said she wanted to make a difference in the world." "And she did," Thomas affirmed. "More than many adults manage in an entire lifetime." Mark smiled through his tears. "You know what Emily said to us the night before the crisis? She said, 'No matter what happens, remember that everything is part of God's plan.' Sometimes, we need to be the answer to someone else's prayer." I think we understand now what she meant. The words hit Thomas deeply. That child's wisdom continued to surprise him, even after her departure. "She told me something similar," Thomas shared, "about God having a bigger plan. At the time, I thought it was just a child's optimism, or something she had heard from adults. But now you see there was more to it," Susan completed. "Emily always had an understanding that went beyond her years, as if she knew things we didn't." They talked for over an hour. Thomas heard stories about Emily he had never known. Her love for animals, how she helped classmates who struggled at school, her ability to find joy in the smallest things. The girl he had known in the hospital was just one facet of an extraordinary soul. As he said goodbye, Susan handed Thomas an envelope. "Emily asked us to give this to you in case she passed away." Thomas accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you for everything." Back in his apartment, Thomas sat in the armchair by the window and opened the envelope. Inside was a drawing made with colored pencils, a simple representation of a hospital with smiling people, including a doctor with gray hair who was obviously him. At the top of the page, in childish handwriting, was written, "Even when we don't see it, God is working." On the back of the drawing was a message. "Dr. Tom, if you're reading this, it means I've gone to live with God. Don't be sad. Remember what I said about His plan being bigger than ours. Maybe you don't believe in God now, but I hope someday you will. He believes in you. Thank you for trying to save me. You're the best doctor in the world. With love, Emily." Tears fell freely down Thomas's face as he held that final gift from Emily. How could a child demonstrate such an understanding of life and death? How could she have such certainty in something that he, with all his education and experience, still questioned? The next morning, Thomas went to the hospital chapel before the start of his shift. Not to ask angry questions this time, but to reflect. Chaplain Michael found him there, sitting quietly. "Dr. Walker," he greeted, sitting beside him. "How are you?" "Still processing," Thomas answered honestly. "I just found out that Emily's organs saved 3 children." Michael nodded. "Life continues in ways we don't always understand." "She knew," Thomas said softly. "Somehow, Emily knew her purpose was greater. She told me about a divine plan, about God's timing. At the time, I thought it was just a child's way of dealing with her situation. But now you see that maybe there was more to it? 3 lives, Michael. 3 children who would have died without Emily's organs." Thomas looked at his own hands, hands trained to heal, but which couldn't save Emily. What kind of divine plan is this, that takes 1 life to save 3? Michael reflected for a moment. "I don't have all the answers, Dr. Walker. Nobody does. But during my years as a chaplain, I've learned that sometimes the miracle isn't the healing we hope for, but the transformation that occurs through the loss." "Neat. What transformation could justify a child's death?" Thomas questioned, not with anger, but with genuine curiosity. "Perhaps the transformation isn't just of the 3 children who received a second chance," Michael suggested gently. "Perhaps it's also the transformation in you." The words reverberated in Thomas in an unexpected way. He thought about how the brief journey with Emily had affected his worldview, his understanding of life and death, his relationship with the unknown. "She asked me if I believed in God," Thomas said, almost to himself. "It was the first time in years I really considered the question. And now, what would you answer?" Thomas looked at the simple altar before him. "I'd say I'm beginning to see something I didn't see before. I don't know if it's God, exactly, as described in religions, but there's something, a connection, a purpose, that goes beyond what I can explain with my science." In the weeks and months that followed, Thomas stayed in touch with the Wilsons. Together, they established a foundation in Emily's name to help families of children with rare diseases. He also began to follow, from a distance, the progress of the 3 children who received Emily's organs. Lily from Chicago, who received the heart, started playing softball 6 months after surgery. Mason from Texas, who received the kidney and part of the liver, was finally able to start kindergarten with other children his age. And Olivia from Boston, who received the other kidney, wrote a school essay about her guardian angel named Emily. A year after Emily's death, Thomas visited her grave in the Boston cemetery. He placed a bouquet of daisies, her favorites according to Susan, and stood there for a moment, contemplating the simple headstone that read, Emily Wilson, 2010-2019. Her heart continues to beat in this world. You were right, Emily, he said softly to the autumn wind. There was a bigger plan, and you changed more lives than you'll ever know, including mine. That evening, Thomas sat in his office after hours. On the wall, where previously there had been only his diplomas and medical certifications, now hung Emily's framed drawing. Beside it, 3 photographs, Lily, Mason, and Olivia, the children who now lived thanks to her. When a young resident knocked on the door, asking about a difficult case, he noticed the drawing on the wall. It's a long story, Thomas smiled, but I have time to tell it, if you want to hear. What's it about? Asked the curious resident. About a 9-year-old girl who taught me more about life, death, and faith than all my years of medical school, Thomas replied. About how, sometimes, the true miracle isn't the healing we seek, but the transformation that occurs within us. And about how one life, even a brief one, can continue to reverberate in the world in ways we never imagined. On Thomas's desk was a small plaque he had recently made. On it were inscribed the words that had become his new personal and professional mantra. Words that Emily had shared with him. Everything has meaning. Everything happens in God's time, not ours. And for the first time in his life, Dr. Thomas Walker truly believed it. This story reminds us that sometimes the deepest truths come from the most unexpected sources, like a child facing her own mortality with more wisdom than most adults possess. Emily's journey teaches us that miracles aren't always the dramatic interventions we pray for, but the ripple effects of love, sacrifice, and purpose that continue long after we're gone. Her 3 organ recipients represent how even in our darkest moments, we can be the answer to someone else's prayers. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of faith, hope, and the incredible impact one life can have on many others. Remember Emily's words. Everything happens in God's time, not ours. Thank you for being part of our journey.